So, you want to design dynamic combat encounters.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the kind that will never be forgotten by your players.
Huh. Oh, never mind. Well, luckily, we've got... What? Nothing.
Go ahead.
We got exactly what you need. Today, we will delve into giving stuff you exactly the tools you need in a simple and easy to use way. God damn.
Are you ready to learn how to build dynamic combat encounters using monster rolls? Well, you are lucky.
Hello and welcome, heroes to the Crit Academy. I'm your host, Justin.
I'm your co-host, Ian.
And I'm your co-host, Brandon.
I'm your guest, Garvin.
Oh, shit. That's right. We got a guest.
It's not that they don't love you. They just didn't notice because the screen wasn't up.
Well, that is conditioned reflex at this point.
That's also true, which is good.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for our main topic today. Ian, do you want to get us started with how to build dynamic encounters using monster rolls?
Well, there's no arguing that key to designing interesting and varied combat encounters is having just as varied groups of monsters. By further breaking down monsters into roles, we can design even more fantastic and memorable combat encounters.
Absolutely. And so, Brandon, what are monster rolls?
Monster rolls is what happens when a monster rolls a die to hit you.
That's true, too. That's too
R-O-L-E. Not R-O-L. Okay. A roll is the term we will be using to describe what the particular monster or NPC's job is during the encounter. While some monsters can fit into multiple categories, we are going to focus on what we think they do best over what they might do best in a particular encounter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my favorites is starting with artillery.
Yeah!
So
because it starts with A. It's alphabetical.
It is alphabetical.
Fuck.
So,
It's also the most fun to use.
It is.
It is. Raining hell. Raining hell down on your players is definitely one. So artillery monsters excel at ranged combat. Whether they rain explosive fires of hell down arrows or even just chucking javelins, artillery is focused on keeping distance during combat. That's what we want to focus on with a creature that we determine as artillery. They tend to be more often than not focused on areas of effect and damage, spreading in between multiple targets, and their distant strategies often means that they lack, more powerful defensive capabilities other than running away and hiding behind somebody, right? So without a good line of defense, artillery can really become dead quick.
Death Haven.
So since we got our guest on, Garwin, for those of you who don't know, Garwin is our Emerald patron, so thank you so much for your support. This
Don't
is
mention
one
it.
of the many perks of being an Emerald patron. When you think artillery, what do you think? What are some of the best ways you can get out of artillery, and what are some good monsters examples you would pick up?
I think of a trebuchet on the back of a mammoth.
Oh my god. I fucking love trebuchets, but then you said the mammoth part. I was like, oh.
Yep.
That's things.
Yes.
That's funny.
It's how I went with a siege in for what's the name of that place? I don't remember the name of the place, but I went with a siege in the module for the early book for Tiamat.
The
first
Horde of the Dragon Queen, I think.
Yeah, Horde of the Dragon Queen. Yeah, they were in the middle of travel and just threw a siege there in the way to see what they would do.
Okay. So when I think artillery, obviously the most obvious is using a bow and arrow, right? But we can do more with that when we play artillery, right? What are some benefits that you guys would apply to a creature and make use of to get if you're going to categorize it as an artillery?
I'd make it slow.
Make it slow
makes sense. AoE would also make sense too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I'd basically decrease its speed and up its damage, whether that means making it use more dice or spreading out its area of effect.
Okay. So one thing I want to touch on is before the show, Garwin and I had a quick discussion about when you're picking out your monsters and building these categories for your encounters, you can keep monsters as they are, but just change like their equipment or the tactics they use. I think the example we discussed was using the kobolds. So a group of 5 kobolds all run the same way is not entertaining. Would you agree?
Well, it depends.
Okay, how so?
I could go on, but only have so much time for the main topics.
Can you give us the 30-second elevator pitch?
No, because I want to keep going.
Okay. So the reason I talk about this is so in the example of the kobolds, giving them a bow, keeping them in foliage, ducking, hiding, disengaging, all those things make them artillery. But you can take the same kobold and max out their hit points and turn them into a brute.
Yep.
Which is our one of our other categories. But some good example monsters that fill this the artillerist role as is would be what, Brandon?
Drow Mage, Flame Skull, or Nothic?
Yeah, those are actually some really good examples because they have a lot of versatility as far as ranged attacks and skill sets. But once again, any sort of monster can fill that role as long as you give them the appropriate weapon to do so. Some are better at it than others. A really great example is the Goblin, right? The Goblin has the nimble escape, which allows them to disengage as a bonus action, right?
Yep.
So by giving them, I'm going to say, okay, I've got 2 goblins in the group. I'm going to give them the artillerist feature. These other goblins, I'm going to give the brute. So their sole job, we're going to max out their HP, and their job is going to be to defend the other kobolds or the other goblins. So, Garwin, can you tell us what a brute is, or what we classify as a brute?
Brutes are an interesting lot. They typically have low defense. This tends to be offset by high hit points, though, and deal superior melee damage. They tend to forego their own safety to hound a particular foe or block an enemy from reaching one of their allies. This becomes a large threat as artillery can unload on a target while a brute keeps them engaged or restrained. They tend to not have too much in their arsenal, but what they do have can be brutal.
And for you Overwatch fans, this is Roadhog.
Yes. This is another one. So let's go back to using the Goblin or the Kobolds. I think because keeping these in this category is really good. So simply maxing out their hit points, because most people go by the average, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty expected. So you could give the Artillerist the minimum number of hit points.
Oh, yeah.
You could give the Brute the maximum number of hit points.
And a big axe.
And a big axe to increase their impact of their attacks. And so we
even better if it's oversized and they can't wield it properly.
Okay. Attack with disadvantage, maybe give them reckless, I guess. But when you give the monsters these roles, we now have a more dynamic encounter. Just with these 2 roles, you got 5 characters. You got 2 regular goblins, 1 brute, and 2 artillerists is going to significantly change the way the combat unfolds.
Definitely.
Don't you think?
Yeah. Like, there's also a way to do it without this whole thing. You just give them all personality and all that, you know? That's one way. Yeah. But this also does simplify the mechanics aspect.
For sure. Brandon has went to tweet the stream, and now it's all echoing.
Where'd you follow him at?
Down right there. So that's the wrong way.
Oh, God!
Anyway, so there's actually some... You got to turn it off if you can't get it to work.
This is why I love this stream.
There are some really good monsters that we already have that fall into the brute category. Owlbear comes into mind because that is very just lots of hit points, and I think it has multi-attack too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What are some other ones, Brandon?
Yeah, the ogre, the troll,
the
berserker. What the hell is a hook horror?
Okay, you know
I don't think you want to know.
Hook horror, not hook horror.
They look like bird-faced creatures with their hands are just giant razor-sharp hooked arms.
So,
yeah, praying mantis burn monster. Yeah.
Fun fact: the original design for it looked just like Gigan from Godzilla.
Of course it did. Where'd your inspiration come from? Nowhere.
Well, I think that they bought a box of miscellaneous figurines and drew the artwork off them, and one of them had to be Giga from Godzilla. When they figured it out, they're like, oh crap.
We're going to get sued. All right. So let's move on to the next one. So we've talked about the artillerist and the brute. The next one is one of my personal favorites, the controller. So if you don't know, controller monsters tend to manipulate their enemies or the battlefield to their advantage. This can take on many different forms, but it often comes down to restricting movement, altering terrain, limiting the actions, or inflicting conditions that weaken their adversaries. Now, controllers are a large umbrella, right? But in most cases, their features and skills can change the tide of battle entirely. So keep in mind, some of the controllers can be a bit complex at times, so you don't want to fill out an encounter with more than one or two of them, because otherwise you can find yourself kind of overwhelmed with all the options that your monsters have. So the most common controller is what? Come on, guys.
A mage.
A mage, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think? What were you thinking?
I was thinking of some sort of a grappler.
A grappler is another good one, right?
Oh yeah.
That's it. It doesn't matter how powerful the enemy is. If the grappler pins your punk ass to the ground and you can't swing your sword,
Oh yeah.
or you do, it's at disadvantage. So to me, that's a very powerful form of control. Mages can alter the terrain. They can mind control and literally control people. Are you okay?
No, I just a grappler pinning someone to the ground, bite the pillow. I'm going in dry.
Oh, jeez.
That's so terrible.
It is.
It's beautiful.
All right. So,
We're gonna get banned.
Ian, what are some of your thoughts on a controller?
A good one can definitely screw with the party and definitely make things more difficult for them. And it certainly makes things more interesting, and it makes them have to think more.
Absolutely. And so going back to our goblin example, right?
Yeah.
We've got 5 goblins still. We've got 1 brute, 2 archers. We got 1 controller, and then 1 regular. So how would you make a goblin a controller?
Well, I'd probably give it a wand of entanglement.
That's good. A wand of entanglement's a good option. What about you, B?
Or a wand of thorn whip.
Goblins.
Too.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
To be a controller?
Yeah.
Numbers.
Number what?
Numbers. A lot of them.
Oh, so like they would just pile on somebody. That's really less than 1 controller and just smearing them with anyway. So I would think
you could also give a goblin gauntlets of Ogre power and have him grapple people.
Also, kudos to Garwin. If you're not already giving your monsters magic items to terrorize your players, that is the hands down the best way to acquire magic items. What do you think, Ian?
That's definitely one way to go about it, although you still don't get attunement for it.
Oh,
well, you still have to wait, right?
Look at this right here.
What?
From Osco on TikTok. A goblin that has a giant spider that just keeps throwing wet web.
Hell yes. I'm down. Get them all wet and sticky with that white stuff. I'm down for that.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
So controllers are a big deal. So even if it's as so much as giving just a net to them to lock something down. If you watch our past Clash of Clashes match with the PvP, we learned that even a simple net can bring down a creature like a barbarian that has rage and advantage and still lock them out for several rounds.
To be fair, the dice rolls kind of sucked.
But that's always going to be a chance, right? That's going to be a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And a net can do that. You can give a goblin a net and make him a controller. Not a very good one, but he would still fill that role.
That's our OP.
But we're also talking about now how we just changed the dynamic of the encounter. Doing what? We gave a goblin a damn net. Like, it completely changes the encounter. So I think that leads a good lead into the next one. Ian, do you want to tell us about defenders?
Defenders often specialize in drawing the attention of enemies away from their allies. They typically have high defenses, hit points, resistance, or maybe a little bit of all the above. They typically give up doing excessive damage to ensure the characters are engaged to them. Defenders tend to have features that allow them to work very well with others, often taking up a leadership role. And some examples could include like a knight, gladiator, goblin captain, veteran.
Yeah, those are good options. And I think you touched on to something really good there, because when you have a character that you design as the defender, this is a character whose sole goal is to absorb damage for some other rounds. While the brutes can usually take a lot of damage, they usually focus on doing some melee damage as well. That's kind of an in-between, but the defender's sole goal is to keep somebody else alive at the cost of themselves. Barbarians fill this role really, really well.
Yep.
The Hobgoblin, that's an interesting choice, I think, because now that I think about one of its abilities, doesn't it just grab one of its minions and use it as a shield? I don't think I thought about that when we were picking that.
Well, I mean, hey, you can use it as a shield for another one.
I still remember that level 20 Battle Royale we did that one time, and the level 20 Barbarian would not die.
Yes. You cannot die.
What, over 250 health? And it was raging?
Yeah.
Doubling it?
Yeah, makes it brutal. So those are really good. Now, keep in mind that regardless of what role the character can choose, because many monsters can cover a multitude of roles, right? We've talked about that with the Goblin and Kobold. Your goal here is when designing an encounter is to decide what role that monster is going to fill for that combat.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Brandon, why don't you tell us? So I do want to give one last shout out to the knight. I think is it the knight that can use an ability called leadership that grants like a impromptu bardic inspiration. Is that correct? I don't remember.
Leadership.
I believe so.
It is leadership. That's the name of the ability.
1 minute. Can other special command or warning whenever a non-hostile creature it can see within 30 feet makes an attack or saving throw, can add a d4 to its roll.
Garland, what do you think about defenders?
Well, I definitely like using them, usually, for example, with a knight, I change him out to give him a big-ass tower shield. I tend to focus that tower shield to a little bit more, AC if it's from front and the sides, but it's just house rules.
Right.
But one thing important for the defender is the ability to also draw attention to yourself so that they go for you instead of someone else. Because you can't always, in D&D, you can't always just step in front of someone and just not have them go on your side and hit the guy behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't there an ability that forces other creatures to have disadvantage on attacking other creatures other than yourself?
Yeah. I
Protection
believe the Ancestral Guardian Barbarian has that.
Yeah, and I think protection allows you to impose disadvantage within range if you have a shield. So
yeah,
there is something there.
Yeah.
So that's another really good one. I think there are a bit of there's room to play in between the brute and the defender. They do walk kind of a similar line.
There's also a way to have a hidden defender if you make him a duelist type of person. He looks like he wouldn't be a defender. It might be like a skirmisher or support, but then you give him the defender role, so it's like they don't expect it.
Right. That's actually, and that's part of it too, right? Mm-hmm. Just by assigning the roles, it can throw off the player characters themselves. And I see Dulcinius talking about goading attack and the fighter specialist. We've talked before as a dungeon master tip, giving all the player or the monsters some of the player features, right?
Yeah.
I'm very notorious for giving my monsters access to battle maneuvers, and I love it.
Yeah.
So
also, something people don't always realize. When it comes to monsters, you don't really have to follow the rules.
Nope.
Like, for example, you could just give a duelist the ability to stab at someone who stabbed at someone else beside him within reach.
A kebab?
Basically.
Kebab?
Let's say a player hits his friend beside him. This duelist, seeing that, can just stab that player.
I would
prefer
he still has to roll to hit, obviously, but not the player. But anyway,
you can step.
You're going home with some stitches.
All right, let's move on to the next one, the Lurker. Brandon, can you tell us a little bit about the Lurker?
Yeah, Lurker monsters tend to have a variety of abilities that allow them to avoid attacks. This can take the form of attacking from stealth. Most often, they usually like to go for the weak guys. And who are the weak people in parties?
Healers usually.
Healers,
the mages,
magic users, or a paladin. Both those healers are not weak at all.
Just don't get tricked by the cleric.
Yeah. I think that.
But also hit and run.
Well, I think. Anyways, do you want to delve into the next part there, Darwin, before we get into full on discussion?
Yeah, sure. Whatever their abilities, they prefer to prowl and stalk their foes and ambush the weakest foe. Wait, what the fuck?
What?
Didn't we just go over that one?
It's because Justin told me to take Lurker before all this, and then he highlighted everything, and I just kind of like
Kept going.
pantomimed the
That's
entire
fine. Anyways,
thing.
so they tend to spend their time stalking, learning capabilities of their prey, which is super important. And this also allows them to enter battle with as much information as possible. So,
In other words, how I play Reaper in Overwatch. It's fun.
yeah. So this is really interesting because when you have a Lurker, it's more than just the stealth that you give rogues, right? It's more than that. Ankeg is a great example, right? That thing isn't hiding. It's just moving along under the ground and just bursts out in the middle of a camping night. And that's not something the spotter's gonna probably see, right? Right? And I think that's what makes it interesting. So when you do have these roles when you're deciding which roles to go with, having a mixture of these different roles, the Lurker is a really, really good one because what do you guys think about having 5 goblins again? I keep going back to the goblins because we keep talking about it, but you have 2 that are Lurkers, and they don't join the battle until the next round when everyone thinks they're reversing 3 goblins.
Like maybe they're hiding on the ceiling or something.
Or hiding on the ceiling, in a tree, in a bushes.
Or they're on a stalagmite.
And a what?
Stalagmite? Those ones that hang down?
Stalagmites.
Stalagmite is hanging from the ceiling. No? I don't know.
No.
Stalagmite, tight, whichever one's hanging from the ceiling. They're just sitting
The
there
pointy
waiting.
thing at the top.
And once they see the players, they go tink with the hammer. And
they drop it on top of them. That's a really good example. And I think it's cool because what happens the first thing around round starts in combat? Everyone thinks this is all the enemies.
Usually, yep.
Oh, yeah.
And so they instantly decide on the tactics that they're going to do, and that unfolds.
So this is going to work. Healer, stay behind me. And all of a sudden you hear, shh. What was that sound?
Chandelier. But that's exactly the point, right? Stalactites grow down from the cave, for clarification. So if 2 Lurker goblins jump out at the end of a first round, they immediately learn who the big smashy person is. They know who the wizard is, and more importantly, they know who's buffing or potentially providing support. So just by adding that, so let's go back to our 5 structure. We have 1 brute, 2, we're going to talk about skirmishers in a second, and 2 lurkers. That's going to change from having just 5 goblins that attack.
Oh, definitely.
And actually, a good example of this is the Reapers of Ball that I used during the last Clash of Classes.
Yes. Do you want to talk about that a little, just a smidgen?
Basically, they're like the assassin-type characters that can turn invisible. And they also gain bonuses for sneak attacking. And they also can charm person, disguise self, and they can even really screw you by casting Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Can't touch
That was a fun round.
Yeah, that was really good. So there's a lot of monsters that can fall into this within the monster manual. The Ankeg, the Bulettes, oozes are one of my favorite, and I was devastated to learn I have been playing gelatinous cubes wrong for my entirety of ever playing.
Don't know their color?
No, they don't have spider climb. Do you have any idea how many times I've dropped gelatinous cubes on people from the ceiling and they don't have spider climb?
Yeah.
They do when you say they do.
Right. Well, I mean, everything can climb, right? But I was so devastated. Anyways, so each of these monsters, whether it's a mimic or a roper, all these different things, they revolve around ambushing, and I think that lurkers are best for that. Let's move into.
You can hide goblins in pit traps.
Let's move on to skirmishers. Do you want to tell us a little bit about skirmishers, Garwin?
Sure. Skirmisher monsters use mobility to threaten the characters. These mobile strikers are in and about in a flash. The defining feature is a powerful tool for building dynamic encounters. They utilize their speed to quickly dart in and strike vulnerable targets.
Yeah, they are most often found alongside brutes or defenders, right? To draw away attacks that will threaten them. The nature of brutes and defenders too often are less mobile creatures. We talked about ogres, for instance. And this gives the skirmishers the room that they need to really dart around the battlefield and get the most of it, right?
A skirmisher can also be a lurker.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that's... I briefly touched on it earlier. Your monster can have multiple roles. The idea is to try to narrow down what you want them to do. So you might say, okay, it's a lurker when it starts, it enters the battlefield, but then becomes a skirmisher, right?
Yep.
And so I like skirmishers. We keep talking about goblins, Brandon. What's the feature goblins have that lets them disengage? Is that nimble escape?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's nimble escape. So that allows them to disengage as a bonus action. So they can run in, skewer somebody, and then immediately get a distance out and away. And that's going to make the battlefield more mobile, and a lot of things darting around will change the way the players react, right?
Not to mention, they very often write works.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yep.
How hard is it to explode with fireball a group of goblins that just charge in?
Very easy. It's fun.
Oh yeah.
Now, what if one's a brute taking the full front and the rest are darting around the battlefield and getting as far away from each other as they can? That makes fireball much less effective. What do you think, Brandon?
I think you made the easy monsters of D&D the hard monsters of D&D.
That's the way I monster roll.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of different monsters that kind of can fall under this category in the monster manual. Brandon, do you want to kind of follow up with some of those for the audience?
Spies, quicklings, centaurs, minotaurs, or spine? Why did your ring light just die?
I have no idea. Don't just finish what you're talking about and then plug it back.
Spies, quicklings, centaurs, minotaurs, or spine devils. Actually, I'll go and take Ox. I'll say quicklings.
Yeah, quicklings are a really good one. So there's a lot of options already in the monster manual, but remember, you're not limited to just these features. You can give features to any monster you want to even help fill these roles, which is awesome.
Oh yeah.
Oh, this is good. Malkara says, just because a monster has a low intelligence doesn't mean they're stupid and don't learn. I love that. And plus 10 cool points to you.
Low int does not mean low wisdom.
Yes. Yeah. I have high intelligence, low wisdom.
You don't need to be very smart to learn that putting your hand in the fire hurts.
That's true. All right, so I think that'll lead us really good into the next one. Ian, do you want to tell us a little bit about the supporters?
The support role is one that tends to focus on helping the rest of his allies stay out of harm's way. They tend to keep their distance and apply aid, shielding, and or healing their allies. While they tend to be a bit weaker in offensive capabilities, they can significantly boost the resilience of their comrades through support spells like Bane, Bless, Fairy Fire, and Aid. And I assume the Bane is applying them on enemies.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Support tends to be weaker in a very different lines, and their support isn't limited to just spells. They can often use poisons, traps, and other tools as well. And a few examples include Drow Priest of Law, the Hagen Priestess, or Cult Fanatics.
Yeah, I really like support. This is kind of a catch-all, I think, because their whole goal, healers would fall under this role too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is a big one. Cure wounds, healing word, whatever it may be. What do you think, Garwin?
Well, it's definitely an interesting category that I unfortunately underuse too much, that I need to start using way more. It might be why my players keep escaping with like 1-digit hit points every now and again.
Anyway.
And you know what I learned going through this? There's not a lot of monsters in the monster manual that can cast Cure Wounds.
Nope.
Oh, no, not a lot.
I was disappointed in that, I'm going to be honest.
I don't remember where it states it, but it does state that when it comes to monster spell lists, they're suggestions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Change them all the time. I do.
Oh, yeah.
That's part of our monster variants all the time. We change that shit. So support kind of covers this big wide role. I think every group should have at least one support, but you don't want to make it so obvious that they go, oh, that guy can heal, go stab him. Because then it becomes a problem. I think if you're going to go the more healing route, having it treated more like a paladin or a cleric, so it's not weak, is a really good direction to go.
I was just figured out a great healing artillery.
What's that?
It's a big, strong dude who's just carrying a big-ass health potion that heals on contact and throws to break it. And then you just roll a d4 to decide which of these 5 squares it lands in to see if it heals his allies or his enemies.
I love it. All right. So aside from changing out their spell lists, that's probably the best way to get to a support that you want. The last one I want to talk about is leaders. Now, there are some monsters that can fill all of these roles in a battle all at once. I like to call these leaders. We want to consider these kind of like the elite monsters, right? These are the big bads. Typically that we set as the big boss, right? Most common examples of these are dragons. Dragons can literally fill any of these roles because they can be stealthy as shit when they want to be and dive from 1,000 feet in the air and swoop up, can't carry your halfling away, and you'll never know what happened.
And here comes a giant fist!
And not to mention that by lore, dragons are supposed to be around, be casting 6th level spells or some such.
Yeah. I'm terrified of Malkara's winged owl bears.
Oh no, that just.
So, dragons, they have intelligence, they have flight, they have claws, they have magical breath. In addition, you can make any monster an elite in the group by simply maximizing its damage and its hit points. You're welcome. There's so much you could do changing to a bigger damage weapon and giving it different tools at its disposal. I'm not even saying magical weapons. We mentioned the goblin getting the net earlier, right? So we recommend in an encounter multiple monsters keeping the elite monster to no more than one, because you don't want it to be overwhelming. And also, it's hard to make single monster fights interesting. You know what I mean? Though I do have to say, 5th edition did a really good job with legendary and lair actions, right? So in your games, this is going to be one of those you will have to more or less encourage them to gather knowledge on the characters. Leaders are going to be the ones that not only are monitoring what's going on, especially when their henchmen start disappearing, but they're also going to pay to get information. If you've never used Scry from your big bad on your players, you're doing it wrong. But leaders don't have to necessarily be the big bad in the group either, or the big bad themselves. They could be a squad leader, right? Somebody that has enough important information, but is the challenge, the big boss of the fight at level 1. You can have a leader, right? He has another boss above him. So overall, as we close this out, Brandon, what are your overall conclusions about this?
Oh, geez. I like it because it separates.
Sorry, I was reading TikTok.
Oh.
You guys get distracted so easily.
I like it because it separates monsters that we're used to. You get players, and like you're saying, you get 5 goblins to come in. Like, we got 5 goblins. They're gonna do what was it, horde tactics or whatever they got?
Pack tactics.
Pack tactics. Yeah.
Do they have that?
I'm pretty sure they do. Or is that kobolds?
I think that's kobolds.
Yeah. Oh.
Anyways, your point still stands.
There's 5 goblins that are gonna do their thing. We know what to do, and then all of a sudden they come up and they hit this one, and it's like ping. Like, oh, he whacked away your warhammer with a shield, and he glares at you in the eye, and 2 of them disappear into the shadows. You can hear them lurking around.
Oh, that's good.
While in the background, you can see one casting some sort of magic that just brings out this ray of light, and
dude, they're just goblins.
It's like, what the fuck is going on?
I'm having Goblin Slayer flashbacks right now.
Oh yeah,
the 2 that were lurking.
But that's what I'm talking about. Just considering the role you want them to fill and deciding how to play them that way, it's as simple as changing their weapon and their tactics to make your story and encounter that much more dynamic.
Speaking of leaders, and you were talking about them spying on the players and whatnot, it reminded me of when you made a troll den mother and gave her the ability to cast Arcane Eye within her territory.
Ooh.
And on top of that, I gave her the ability to 2 times a day traverse through the trees within her territory with 2 other trolls. So the players entered the forest, killed a few trolls, they were there for a day or so. Then they started noticing this grotesque-looking eye floating about. They didn't know what the fuck it was at first until someone got an Arcana check.
Right.
And then, as they were just settling down to start rest, suddenly there were 3 trolls coming at them.
Gotcha, bitch.
Jesus.
Just out of the trees, literally out of them.
I love it. And that's a powerful tool, right? So in the context of building dynamic combat encounters, the utilization of these monster roles will help you diversify your encounter, even if it's the same monster. So not only causing you, not only because you're adding a variety of monster types, but because each have their own solid tactics, even if they're the same monster. So making for a solid and memorable experience in your Dungeons and Dragons game. Keep in mind, this doesn't just apply to D&D. This can apply to any role-playing game that's got some sort of combat, right? You just say, okay, I want combat. I want to make it dynamic. Here are some tools. What do I classify to fill out these roles?
Yeah.
That's it.
For example, you have lizard folk, you have a swamp,
Good topic.
you have a lurker controller.
That was a good topic.
Yeah. Just give the lizard folk a whip that functions like the spell wine whip. They whip the players, drag them to them, and then hold them under the water with them.
Get over here!
That's really good. I like that. All right, so I think that'll do it for our main topic today. Before we move
Shameless plug.
Before we move on to our honor tips and tricks, you'll see this lovely book right here. Our Extraordinary Expedition book is live now. I want to thank the hundreds of backers that helped bring it to life. We couldn't have done it without you. It's a big project. I want to take a moment to talk about some of the subclasses that are actually in it. We had a nice review by Rogue Watson that talked about how he really enjoyed the player option. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about it. Aside from the book containing 10 flexible adventures, it came with, I think, 4 subclasses. And one of them is one of my personal favorites is a hunter-like ranger that can set traps. And so we gave a really huge list of traps that you can set up and rules to plant them. It's one of those things that consumes like a short or long rest to set up. So it really does require a lot of planning to get the most out of it. But I'm telling you what, it is so juicy and so rewarding to go out of your way and build a trap and then lure the enemies into it. You literally can take a very dynamic combat encounter your DM has spent a good amount of time prepping and destroy it like that with your preparations.
And who doesn't love destroying the DM's combat encounters?
I'm gonna cry.
All you need is a good pit trap.
And there's some other really good ones in there too. You got to check it out whether you like playing the Sawbones Rogue that's a healer or the Archer Wizard subclass, which is cool.